In today's compelling story, we will meet Elisa Gray, a young woman who faced seemingly insurmountable challenges from the very beginning of her life. Abandoned as a baby and raised amidst neglect and disdain, she fought with all her might to change her reality. With every hardship she endured, her determination to overcome grew stronger. Elisa finally found a job opportunity at the small RiverMart market, but what seemed to be the start of a new chapter quickly turned into a battlefield. Harassment disguised as jokes, injustices, and a corrupt manager willing to do anything to maintain his power became her daily reality. Until one simple act of kindness, helping an elderly man who had forgotten his wallet, changed the course of her life. What she didn't know was that this act would ignite a series of events that would uncover dark secrets, pit everyone involved against each other, and reveal truths no one expected. Get ready for an emotional story full of twists and turns that shows how integrity and kindness can make all the difference, even in the darkest times. Are you ready to find out what happened? It was a cold night in Riverfield. The wind swept through the deserted streets while the city's few lights flickered under a blanket of mist. It was in this setting that the caretaker of the town's orphanage found a crying baby in a small cardboard box left right at the front door. Wrapped in a thin, stained blanket, the girl could barely stay warm. "Oh my God, who would do this?" the woman murmured, carefully picking up the baby. Beside her was a simple and short note. "Take care of her, I can't." The orphanage staff was shocked, but little Elisa, the name chosen by the caretakers, seemed to bring something special. During her first months, the child's innocent laughter won everyone over, bringing life to the environment. When prospective adopters began showing interest in her, there was hope that Elisa's future would be different. Among the candidates, one couple was quickly approved. They smiled and promised to give the girl a safe and loving home. "She'll have everything she needs," they said as they signed the papers. The caretakers believed them. On the day Elisa was taken away, some orphanage staff even cried with emotion, thinking they had done the best for her. But the promises didn't last long. The house where Elisa went to live was grand on the outside but cold on the inside. It soon became clear that her new parents weren't genuinely interested in her. To them, Elisa was just a way to secure the government financial benefits provided to foster parents. Her room was dark and windowless. An old wooden bed and a thin mattress were all she had. Meals, often leftovers from dinner, barely warmed. Elisa grew up isolated. At school, her classmates noticed her torn clothes, worn-out shoes, and the musty smell she carried. This kept her from forming any friendships. "Why am I not like them?" Elisa would ask herself, sitting in the small space she called her room. Days in her foster parents' house were always the same. Empty. They rarely spoke to her, and when they did, it was to give orders. "Wash the dishes, sweep the floor, don't touch that." The young girl quickly understood there was no room for mistakes or distractions in that house. To cope with her loneliness, Elisa began spending more time in the backyard. It was a neglected space, filled with debris and weeds, but to her it was an opportunity to create something. Using a small spoon she found among the remains of an old garden, she dug holes in the hardened soil. One day she discovered old seeds in the kitchen. "Maybe this will work," she thought. After planting the seeds, Elisa cared for the soil patiently. She watered it every day with an old mug and waited for signs of life. The backyard was the only place where she felt a bit of freedom. At night she would lie on her thin mattress, look at her dirt-covered hands, and imagine the day something would grow. The first plant to sprout was a small crooked carrot, but to Elisa, it was like a trophy. Seeing what she had accomplished, she smiled for the first time in months. It was during these afternoons in the backyard that she met Mr. Charles, the elderly neighbor of the orphanage, who lived alone in a simple house next door. One day, noticing the girl kneeling in the dirt, he approached the fence. "What are you trying to do there, young lady?" "I want to grow food, but I don't really know how." Charles chuckled softly. "Well, you're off to a good start, but these weeds will steal all the water. You need to pull them out first." Elisa looked at him with curiosity. "Do you know how to do it right?" "I do. When I was little, my mother had a huge garden. I can teach you if you'd like." And so day by day, Mr. Charles began to show up. He explained which plants needed more water, which should be protected from strong sunlight, and even how to use food scraps to fertilize the soil. Elisa listened carefully and followed every tip. "You've got a knack for this, kid. One day you'll have a real garden," he said, watching her harvest some lettuce leaves. This small act of kindness meant so much to Elisa, not because she loved gardening, that was only part of it, but because for a few minutes someone cared about her. When her foster parents asked why she spent so much time in the backyard, Elisa simply replied, "It's so we can have fresh food." They didn't question her. They didn't care as long as she stayed out of their way. Besides the garden, Elisa found solace in her school books. Since her room had no light, she lit a small hidden candle under the table to read late into the night. Stories about different worlds, distant places, and people finding happiness gave her something to believe in. As time passed, the backyard began to come alive. There were small achievements, some carrots, tomatoes, and green leaves. With each success, Elisa felt that maybe, just maybe, life could be a little different from what she had known. Mr. Charles changed too. Once a reclusive and quiet man, he now smiled whenever he saw the girl. "You remind me of my granddaughter, you know? She loved gardening too." Elisa never asked what had happened to his granddaughter. She didn't want to touch on a delicate subject. For her, the simple fact that Charles showed up at the fence was enough. He was the only person who treated her with respect and kindness, and she cherished every lesson as if it were a treasure. Little by little, the girl became stronger, not because life got easier, but because she learned on her own to survive the difficulties. With dirt-covered hands and a heart full of hope, Elisa continued dreaming of better days. Elisa's birthday began like any other day. There were no congratulations, no cake, no presents. Only the heavy silence in the house and the usual indifference of her foster parents. She woke up early, cleaned the house, and went to the backyard to care for the garden as she did every day. But when she returned inside, she found something she never expected. Her few clothes and belongings were packed in a small suitcase near the door. "What's going on?" she asked, confused. Your adoptive mother, with her arms crossed, responded coldly, "You're a grown woman now, Elisa. The law says the benefit we receive for you ends when you turn 18. So it's over. It's time for you to move on with your life." Elisa felt a chill down her spine. "But where am I supposed to go?" "That's not our problem. We've done enough for you. We gave you a roof, food until now. You should be grateful. Here's the address of a shelter that might help you for a few days." "Good luck," her adoptive father said as he handed her a crumpled piece of paper with an address scribbled in pen. Without another word, they opened the door. Elisa stood there for a few seconds, staring at the floor. There were no tears, just a void that felt bigger than anything she'd ever experienced before. She picked up her suitcase, took a deep breath, and stepped out. She walked through the streets of Riverfield with the paper in her hand, unsure of what to expect. When she arrived at the shelter mentioned, she was informed there were no vacancies but was told she could try applying for a small apartment financed by the city. After enduring much bureaucracy and waiting, she was handed the keys to a place that would, at least temporarily, be her new home. The apartment was small, with peeling walls and a musty smell that seemed embedded in the air. But it was hers. Elisa placed her suitcase on the floor and looked around. There was a rusty metal bed and an old table with a crooked chair. Or it wasn't much, but she knew she could make it better over time. That night, sitting on the bed, Elisa finally let the tears fall. It wasn't just the fact that she had been kicked out, but the confirmation that, to those who were supposed to have been her family, she had never meant anything. After crying for a while, she dried her eyes and looked out the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance. It was then she decided, "I won't let this destroy me. I'll build my life my way, and above all, I'll continue to be who I am. They may have discarded me, but they won't take away the kindness I still carry." Elisa spent the night organizing her belongings and trying to plan her next steps. There wasn't much she could do at that moment, but for the first time she had something important. Freedom. It was terrifying, but at the same time, the possibility of starting over gave her a glimmer of hope. That night, even amid the loneliness and fear, Elisa made a promise to herself. "I'll never become like them." After weeks of going door to door in search of work, Elisa was beginning to lose hope. Every interview seemed to end the same way. "Thank you for coming, but we've already filled the position." Or worse, complete silence. One afternoon, as she walked through the bustling streets of Riverfield, she noticed a small sign taped to the window of a local market, the RiverMart. "Help wanted, immediate start." Elisa took a deep breath, adjusted her hair, and walked in. The place was small and stuffy, with slightly disorganized shelves. Behind the counter, a thin man with slick-back hair and an impatient expression watched her enter. He looked to be about 50, with the demeanor of someone who had seen better days. "I need a job. I can do anything you need," Elisa said, trying to sound confident. Victor Marsh, the manager, raised an eyebrow. He had already interviewed 3 people that day, but Elisa seemed different. Dressed simply, with eyes that reflected a certain innocence, she gave the impression of being desperate. Exactly the type of employee he believed he could easily manipulate. "Have you worked anywhere before?" "Not officially, but I learned fast. I can organize shelves, clean, assist customers." Victor paused, assessing the young woman from head to toe. You might work out. Come in tomorrow morning for training." "Thank you, sir. I promise to do my best," Elisa replied with a relieved smile. The training the next day was led by Lara, an employee who had been at RiverMart for 8 months. She was about 25 and seemed to know how everything worked there. From the start, she was friendly to Elisa, showing her how to organize merchandise, operate the register, and deal with difficult customers. "You're going to do well here, girl," Lara said as she showed her the product locations in the stockroom. Elisa felt grateful. After so much time alone, there was finally someone who seemed willing to help her. In her first days, the new hire worked hard to learn everything quickly. Victor seemed satisfied, though he made a point of standing too close, always with uncomfortable comments. Lara noticed but never said anything, just looking away. After a few weeks, Elisa began to notice that Lara had odd habits. More than once, she saw her tampering with the register or putting money into her pocket after serving a customer. Elisa decided not to say anything. After all, she was happy to have a job and didn't want to create problems. One day, Lara approached her while they were arranging a shelf of cereals. "Elisa, can I tell you a secret?" Lara asked, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Of course. I found a way to make some extra cash here. It's nothing serious, you know? Just adding a few cents to some customers' purchases. They never notice. And if they do, I just say it was a system error. If you want, I can show you how it works. With the salary we earn here, a few extra bucks help a lot." Elisa felt her heart tighten. She knew Lara had been one of the few people to treat her kindly, but the idea of deceiving customers went against everything she believed in. "No, I can't do that, Lara." "Sorry, I don't want to get into trouble." Lara shrugged and said, "That's fine, but keep it between us, okay? You wouldn't want Victor finding out. He'd never handle something like this well." Elisa agreed but felt uneasy. The RiverMart, which seemed like a fresh start, was beginning to reveal its challenges. Between Victor's behavior and Lara's proposals, she knew she'd need to be cautious to protect the little she had gained. In the first weeks, Victor Marsh seemed like just another typical manager. He made comments about Elisa's performance and always found something to criticize, but nothing unexpected. Over time, however, his behavior began to change, and not in a good way. "You make the uniform look great," Victor said one day with a smile that was far from innocent. Elisa pretended not to hear and continued organizing the products on the shelf, but she felt discomfort rising through her body. Soon the comments became more frequent. "That smile must make customers spend more." Or, "Don't forget, Elisa, if you ever need anything, you can come to me. Anything." Victor also started getting too close. Every time Elisa went to the stockroom, he found an excuse to be there too. "Let me help you with that," he'd say, putting his hand on her shoulder or insistently touching her arm. One time, while they were organizing the freezer, Victor placed his hand on her waist. Elisa quickly stepped to the side and said, "No need. I'm already done here." He laughed as if it were a joke, but the look he gave her was anything but playful. Things got worse when Victor began manipulating situations to make her feel indebted. "I gave you this job when no one else would, remember? Don't forget who helped you." He said it almost daily, as if it were a constant reminder that Elisa depended on him. One night, as they were closing the store, Victor insisted on walking her to the bus stop. Elisa tried to politely decline. "That's not necessary, it's just a short walk." "I insist. The world out there is dangerous, Elisa." During the walk, he asked invasive questions about her personal life. "Do you have a boyfriend? Do you live alone? It must be hard, right? Someone like you should have more protection." Elisa realized that Victor was trying to create a forced bond, something he could use as a means of control. Back at the store, his advances continued. Victor started showing up beside her during lunch breaks, sitting down uninvited and trying to force conversations. He acted as if they were close friends, but Elisa knew it was his way of asserting himself. She began to subtly protect herself. She avoided being alone in the stockroom or any area where Victor might show up. Whenever he tried to touch her, she would step back immediately, avoiding confrontation. She kept her tone professional, but her responses grew increasingly curt. Even so, Elisa knew this wouldn't be enough in the long run. "I need to find a way to get out of here before this goes too far," she thought. One night, lying on the small mattress in her apartment, she started jotting down potential solutions. "If I save part of my paycheck, I can look for another job. I need to be patient and avoid letting him pressure me." At the same time, she knew she couldn't count on anyone else. Lara, who had her own flaws, never intervened in Victor's abuses. It was as if everyone accepted his behavior as normal. Despite the daily fear and tension, Elisa maintained her integrity. She always did her job to the best of her ability, leaving no room for criticism or attacks. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. If Victor wasn't confronted, he wouldn't stop on his own. It was then that Elisa started observing more carefully, trying to figure out how she could turn the situation to her advantage without losing what she had fought so hard to achieve. It was a quiet morning at RiverMart. Elisa was at the register, mentally organizing her to-do list while attending to the few customers who came in. Victor was in his office, and Lara, as usual, was more focused on looking busy than actually working. That's when the store door opened and an elderly man entered slowly. He was wearing an old worn-out jumpsuit, and his cap looked like it had seen better days. Despite his tired appearance, there was something polite about his gestures. He smiled timidly at Elisa as he pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. "Good morning, miss," he said in a weak but warm voice. "Could you help me? I made a shopping list, but my eyes aren't good enough to find everything on the shelves." Elisa took the list, read it quickly, and noticed it was composed of basic items: rice, beans, milk, bread. He waited silently as she went to get the products. When she returned to the register, the man pulled out a small bundle of money from his pocket but quickly frowned. "Oh no, I think I left my wallet at home," he said, visibly uncomfortable. He looked at Elisa, almost apologetic. "Look, I don't usually do this, but could I take these groceries now? I'll come back later to pay, I promise. You can even hold on to some document of mine as a guarantee." Before Elisa could respond, Lara appeared from the nearby aisle, overhearing part of the conversation. She crossed her arms and let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, sure. Like we've never heard that excuse before. We're not a charity, sir. If you don't have money, you don't get anything. Simple as that." The elderly man seemed to shrink. "I just forgot my wallet. I don't want to cause any trouble." "Trouble? You're already causing trouble just by being here. Come back when you actually have money," Lara said, gesturing toward the door. Elisa felt her face flush with embarrassment at Lara's words. She looked at the man, who seemed more sad than angry, and something inside her wouldn't let her stay silent. "It's okay," Elisa said, picking up the bag of groceries. "Take the items, sir. A family lunch is worth far more than this. Come back when you can." Lara scoffed. "Are you out of your mind? Are you going to pay for this out of your own pocket? You know Victor is going to freak out when he finds out, right? If he freaks out, it'll come out of my paycheck." "It's not your problem," Elisa said firmly, looking directly at Lara before shaking her head and walking away. The man took the bag with trembling hands. "You don't know how much this means to me. I'm waiting for my son, whom I haven't seen in years. My wife is preparing his favorite lunch, and this is important. Thank you so much, truly." He gave a small smile before slowly leaving the store. Elisa watched him go, feeling she had done the right thing. "Let's see if Victor thinks so too," Lara muttered with a sneer before disappearing down the aisles. Elisa knew she would face consequences for her decision, but for the first time in days she felt in control, even if just for a moment. By mid-afternoon, Victor Marsh stormed out of his office with determined steps, holding a small receipt. His expression was grim, and everyone who crossed his path avoided eye contact. "Elisa!" he yelled, his voice echoing through the store. She, who was stocking canned goods, felt her stomach sink. She put down the can she was holding and turned around slowly. Victor was already heading toward her, waving the paper in his hand. Some customers in the store stopped to watch, while Lara discreetly appeared from a nearby aisle, leaning against the wall to watch the scene unfold. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Victor shouted, holding up the paper in front of her. "You let a customer leave with unpaid groceries, without authorization? Who do you think you are to make such a decision?" "He promised to come back and pay, sir. He was in a difficult situation, and I just wanted to help." "A difficult situation?" Victor interrupted, raising his voice. "Who here isn't in a difficult situation? Do you think this store is your personal charity? It's bad enough that this place is barely breaking even, and now I find out I have an employee giving away free groceries." Elisa's face burned with shame. Customers murmured among themselves, pretending to continue browsing the products. Lara in the background remained silent, but wore a slight smile that seemed to fuel Victor's anger. "If that man doesn't return by the end of the day, I'm deducting every cent of those groceries from your paycheck," he continued, stepping dangerously close to her. "And don't think this is over. I'm watching you, Elisa. If this happens again, you won't just lose your job. Or better yet, you'll have to explain yourself to me in a different way." Elisa stepped back. The meaning of his words was clear, and Lara, who had crossed her arms, merely raised an eyebrow as if to say, "I told you so." "I understand, sir," Elisa said, her voice trembling. "It won't happen again." Victor let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, I'm sure it won't." He turned abruptly and walked away, leaving Elisa alone in the aisle, with everyone's eyes on her. Lara then approached, feigning sympathy. "See? I told you. Victor doesn't forgive. I hope you're ready to deal with him because he won't forget this anytime soon." Elisa didn't respond. Clenching her fists, she returned to her work, trying to ignore the weight of the moment. But deep down, she knew she needed to find a way out before Victor crossed a line she couldn't tolerate. The afternoon dragged on at RiverMart. Elisa tried to focus on her tasks, but the humiliation still lingered. Victor, satisfied with his display of power, had returned to his office, while Lara wandered the store with a nonchalant look. The screech of tires on the asphalt drew everyone's attention. Through the window, a luxury car parked in front of the store, gleaming under the sunlight. The driver's door opened, and a tall man dressed in designer clothes and sunglasses stepped out. He walked around to open the passenger door, helping Arthur out carefully. Elisa's heart raced as she saw the elderly man she had helped earlier, walking in alongside the elegant man. Customers stopped what they were doing, watching the pair make their way through the store toward the counter. "Hello again, young lady," Arthur said with a gentle smile. "I promised I'd return, and here I am. This is my son, Nathaniel." Before Elisa could respond, Nathaniel removed his sunglasses and fixed his eyes on her. His expression was firm, but there was warmth in his demeanor. "You're Elisa, right? My father told me about you." "Yes, sir," she replied nervously. "He forgot his wallet earlier and You did more than most would," Nathaniel interrupted, smiling slightly. "But I'm here for another reason. I need to speak with the manager." At that moment, Victor appeared from his office, drawn by the commotion. He froze in the middle of the aisle upon recognizing Arthur. His face immediately paled, and his confident posture disappeared. "Mr. Hart, what brings you here?" Victor asked, his voice unsteady. "Good question, Victor," Nathaniel replied, stepping forward. "My father came to this store earlier today, and what he encountered was disgraceful. But let's start with the basics. Why did you treat my father like just any other customer, without even recognizing him?" Victor stammered, trying to find an explanation. I didn't know he was your father. He didn't mention anything. And even if he hadn't, does that justify what he experienced? The insults? The threats? Is this the kind of environment you think is acceptable in one of my stores?" Laura, who had been silently watching the scene until now, took a step back, trying not to be noticed. "I can explain, sir. There must have been some misunderstanding," Victor tried, but Nathaniel raised his hand, silencing him. "I've heard enough from my father. He told me everything, including what happened to this young woman here." Nathaniel pointed to Elisa, who was watching the scene in shock. Victor tried to change his tone, now appealing to sympathy. "Elisa is new here, sir. Sometimes she makes impulsive decisions, but I assure you, this doesn't reflect the overall performance of the store." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "Impulsive decisions? You're talking about someone who did the right thing while you turned this place into a stage for abuse? I invested in this network believing people like you could make a difference. But what I find here is the opposite of what we stand for." The market was in absolute silence. Customers and employees watched the confrontation without blinking. "Father, please, have a seat for a moment," Nathaniel said to Arthur, gesturing toward a nearby chair. He then turned back to Victor. "This store is the only one in the chain that shows consistent drops in revenue. My father came here out of curiosity, and look at what he found. Do you think I wouldn't do something about it?" Victor shook his head, trying to say something, but no words came out. "I've seen enough. I want you to accompany me to the office now," Nathaniel said with authority. He looked at Laura, who was frozen. "And you, come along too." As the two headed to the office, Nathaniel turned to Elisa. "I still want to speak with you later. Thank you for taking care of my father." Elisa nodded, speechless, as Nathaniel disappeared into the room with Victor and Laura. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but she knew the storm was just beginning for those two. The RiverMart office was tense. Nathaniel Hart, with his piercing gaze, sat at the desk while Victor and Laura stood visibly uncomfortable. He spread a pile of reports on the desk and began flipping through them. "Victor, I know this store has been experiencing financial problems. I want you to explain how this happened," Nathaniel said calmly, but his tone carried undeniable authority. Victor cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. "Well, sir, it's a combination of factors. The location isn't as busy as it used to be, and operational costs have increased. Also, new employees don't always understand how to maximize sales." He glanced subtly at Elisa, trying to imply she was the problem. Nathaniel leaned forward. "Interesting. Then why are other stores in the same region consistently profitable? And more importantly, why are there such large discrepancies in the inventory and cash reports here?" Victor stammered, opening and closing his mouth as if searching for the right words. Before he could respond, Nathaniel continued. "I've already started an audit of this store's operations. What I've found so far is extremely concerning. There are goods recorded as purchased but never arriving in inventory. Funds disappearing from the cash register without explanation. And what stands out the most is a pattern that points directly to you, Victor." Victor stepped forward, desperately trying to defend himself. "Sir, I swear this has nothing to do with me. It must be a system error." He pointed at Elisa, standing outside the door. "That new girl, she has no experience. Maybe she made a mistake." Nathaniel narrowed his eyes and looked at Laura. "And you, Laura? Do you have anything to add?" Laura, who had remained silent until now, began to visibly sweat. Her confident expression vanished, replaced by a mix of fear and guilt. "Mr. Nathaniel, I only do what I'm told," Laura began, but her voice trembled. "I didn't know that. I mean, I'm not responsible for what happens in the inventory." Nathaniel fixed his gaze on her. "Are you saying Victor told you to do something wrong?" Victor, sensing the threat, quickly turned to Laura. "Don't make up stories, Laura. You know I've always followed the rules." That was the breaking point. In a desperate act, Lara exploded. "Followed the rules? You've been embezzling money from the store for months and even used me to cover up your mess. You convinced me to falsify records in the system, manipulate the cash register, and now you want to pin everything on me? No!" Nathaniel watched the exchange but maintained a serious and impenetrable expression. He let Laura continue as Victor tried unsuccessfully to interrupt her. "And you know what else, Mr. Hart?" Laura continued, pointing at Victor. "He uses his position to intimidate everyone, especially women. I've seen how he treats Elisa, and how he forces people to do what he wants. Victor shouted, trying to regain control. "You're lying, Lara. You're saying this because you know you'll be fired." Nathaniel raised his hand, demanding silence. He turned to Lara. "Do you confirm that you participated in the fraud?" Lara hesitated but finally lowered her head. "Yes, but only because he forced me." Nathaniel stood. "What I just heard is more than enough. Victor, you're officially terminated. You will be indicted for embezzlement, and the audit documents will be sent to the authorities. Lara, your situation will also be evaluated, but your confession may help in the process." Victor lost control. "You're making a mistake. I did everything to save this store." "Save it," Nathaniel retorted. "You destroyed what you were supposed to protect. And as for your threats and manipulations, that will cost you dearly." Nathaniel opened the office door. "Elisa, come in here." She entered, trying to steady her nerves. Nathaniel looked at her and said firmly, "I've heard everything that happened. You were a victim of a toxic environment, but you acted with integrity. That will not be forgotten." As Elisa looked at Victor, he avoided her gaze, defeated. Lara, on the other hand, sat in the corner, knowing she would have to face the consequences of her actions. By the end of the day, Victor was escorted out of the store by the police, and Lara was dismissed. RiverMart, which seemed to be sinking in problems, began to see a glimmer of hope. And Elisa, for the first time, felt that her honesty had paid off. The days after Victor and Lara's departure were strange for Elisa. The atmosphere at RiverMart was lighter, but she still felt the weight of everything that had happened. The veteran employees looked at her differently, and some even began to treat her with more respect. One morning, while organizing products on the shelves, Elisa heard the sound of firm footsteps. When she turned around, she saw Nathaniel walking into the store, this time without his father by his side. He was well-dressed, as always, but there was a relaxed tone in his posture. "Good morning, Elisa," he said with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Hart," she replied, trying to hide her nervousness. "Please call me Nathaniel, and I'd like to speak with you in the office if you have a moment." Elisa nodded and followed him to the small room that had once been Victor's domain. Upon entering, Nathaniel gestured for her to sit. "First, I want to thank you again for what you did for my father," he began. "Your kindness and courage were what brought the truth about what was happening here to light. If it weren't for you, things could have gone much worse." "I just did what I thought was right," Elisa replied shyly. Nathaniel smiled. "And that's exactly what we need in this place. Honesty, courage, and someone who genuinely cares about people." He paused for a moment before continuing. "Elisa, after evaluating everything, I've decided that you're the right person to manage this store. I need someone I can trust, and you've already proven you have that in abundance." Elisa was speechless. "Me? Manager? But I've never done this before, and neither had Victor, apparently," Nathaniel said with a hint of humor. "But you have what it takes. You can learn the technical parts over time, but character can't be taught, and you already have that." Elisa hesitated for a moment, but the encouragement in his voice was sincere. "If you believe I can do it, then I accept." Nathaniel extended his hand, and she shook it, feeling a warmth of trust she had never experienced before. The days that followed were transformative. Elisa began adjusting to her new position with Nathaniel's help. He often visited the store to check on how things were going, offering advice, administrative adjustments, and sometimes just lighthearted conversation. "How are things going?" he asked during one of his visits. "More smoothly than I imagined. Thank you for trusting me." Nathaniel smiled. "You're doing great, Elisa. This store is already bouncing back, and that's thanks to you." Over time, those visits became more personal. Nathaniel always found an excuse to spend more time with Elisa. He praised her work, but also asked about her life, her dreams, and the challenges she had faced before coming to RiverMart. Elisa felt a growing connection. He wasn't just her boss. There was something more in the way he looked at her, something genuine. Arthur, who also stopped by the store occasionally, made a point of reinforcing the admiration he felt for her. "You're like a daughter to me now, you know that," he said one day while helping organize a shelf. The new routine at RiverMart brought not only stability but also hope. Elisa finally felt she was recognized for who she was, not what people wanted her to be. And with each passing day, Nathaniel's smile and frequent visits made it clear that something special was beginning between them. She knew there was still much to learn, but she was confident she could face any challenge. And this time, she wasn't alone. RiverMart felt like a completely different place. The departure of Victor and Lara brought a new atmosphere to the store. Elisa, now as manager, decided that the space would not just be a workplace, but an environment where everyone felt valued. In her first days on the job, she gathered the team. "I want you all to know this store won't be like it was before," she began, looking each employee in the eye. "I know what it's like to be treated as if you don't matter. That ends here. We're all going to work together to make this place thrive, and we'll do it with respect and honesty." The employees, some still surprised by the leadership change, responded with nods and shy smiles. But as days went by, the difference became noticeable. Elisa implemented small gestures that made a big impact, listening to the team's suggestions, creating a more organized environment, and even introducing fairer breaks. Arthur Hart, the elderly man who had been the spark for all this transformation, continued visiting the store. He didn't just buy groceries, he brought stories and advice. "You remind me of my wife," he said one day while helping Elisa organize a shelf. "She always said kindness was the best tool to change the world. And look, it seems like you're succeeding." Elisa laughed, a bit shy. "I'm just trying to do what's right, Arthur. But I wouldn't have managed without you. If it weren't for that day..." Arthur raised his hand, interrupting her. "You're the one who made the choice, girl. All of this is because of who you are." He paused and added with a serious look, "But if you need help, I'll always be here. You have someone by your side now." Those words meant more to Elisa than she could express. Arthur was like the grandfather she never had, and knowing he was around strengthened her even more. Nathaniel also began visiting the store more often. While his visits always started with professional matters, reports, goal adjustments, or expansion plans, they often ended with long conversations with Elisa. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her beyond work. "So what did you do before working here?" he asked one day as they checked the inventory. Elisa smiled, slightly embarrassed. "Nothing very exciting. I was just trying to get by." "And now you're running an entire store. Impressive, don't you think?" She laughed, still not used to the compliments. "I guess I got lucky, and a lot of help, from your father and you." Nathaniel looked at her, as if considering something. "You deserve all of this, Elisa, and more." His words stayed in her mind long after he left that afternoon. The connection between them was becoming increasingly clear, but Elisa wasn't sure what to think. She knew there was still much to organize in her life before considering anything beyond work. Over the months, RiverMart became one of the most profitable stores in the chain. Elisa knew the credit was shared. The team, Arthur, and even Nathaniel had contributed, but deep down she felt proud of having transformed the place into something more than just a store. One evening, as Arthur was leaving, he turned and said, "You know, girl, the best beginnings always come after the biggest challenges. And yours? It's just starting." Elisa smiled, feeling the warmth of his words. He was right. This was just the start of something bigger, not just for RiverMart, but for herself. If you made it to the end, comment below. I read until the end. Share this story and help spread the emotion to more people. Just click share and let this impressive story inspire others.